publicly bullied a little bit just by, when I read things that clearly aren't true, or that, whichever way someone looks at it, it's a negative side.
At 41, Pippa Middleton just exposed her husband's double life, and what she found will leave you speechless. For years, she stood beside royalty, polished, poised, and seemingly untouched by scandal. But behind the elegant smiles and public appearances, Pippa Middleton was living a lie, one she didn't even know existed. In a stunning revelation, she's come forward with claims that her husband maintained a secret penthouse in Monaco, a hidden mistress, and even fathered a child she never knew about. Why is she speaking now? What finally pushed her to uncover the truth and confront it? Stay with us as we reveal the shocking details of betrayal, secrecy, and a double life that could tear her world apart. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The world knows her as the younger sister of the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton. Pippa Middleton, always poised, always smiling, and always a step behind the royal spotlight, has long occupied a unique space in British public life. She has been the picture of composed elegance, graceful, charitable, and decidedly private. Her stunning entrance into global consciousness during her sister's royal wedding in 2011 placed her firmly in the world's gaze, yet she never courted fame in the way others might. Pippa chose a life of balance, building a family and personal brand, marrying a well-known financier, and stepping quietly into the background. But all of that changed with one headline. At 41, Pippa Middleton finally breaks silence about her husband. I found out about his double life with a woman in Monaco. The words, stark and unforgiving, blazed across headlines, social media feeds, and tabloids in the early hours of a rainy Tuesday morning. The story that followed was not a whisper from the paparazzi or an unconfirmed rumor printed in the back pages of a glossy magazine. It was Pippa herself. Her voice. Her story. Her pain. Public. Raw. Undeniable. What followed was nothing short of a bombshell revelation that tore apart the illusion of marital bliss and shook the upper echelons of British high society. For years, Pippa had remained the ever-supportive wife to James Matthews, a hedge fund manager with family ties to the glitzy, wealthy playground of St. Bart's in Monaco. Their wedding in 2017 was a lavish yet tasteful affair, drawing royals, aristocrats, and global attention. The couple welcomed children. They made appearances. They smiled at charity events. But, as the world now knows, behind those smiles was a betrayal too devastating to remain hidden. The unraveling began discreetly. A quiet sense of unease, a strange change in routine, whispers from friends that didn't sit right, and eventually, a single piece of evidence that shattered the careful illusion of trust. What Pippa discovered was far beyond what most would even dare to imagine: a secret penthouse in Monaco, a lover with ties to the European elite, and a child, his child, conceived and raised in secret. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a double life. Sources close to the Middleton family reveal that Pippa spent months battling with the knowledge privately, hoping for answers, closure, even reconciliation. But the magnitude of the deception left little room for redemption. The image of James Matthews as a dedicated family man, polished, discreet, dependable, was torn to shreds overnight. The timing of her decision to come forward is telling. At 41, Pippa Middleton is no longer the wide-eyed 20-something with the world watching her every move. She is a mother, a businesswoman, a sister to the future queen. And now, she is a woman who has decided that silence is no longer strength. Her statement, delivered in a composed yet emotionally charged interview, was as articulate as it was heartbreaking. For years I believed in the integrity of our marriage, she said. But sometimes, love is not enough. Sometimes, the truth finds its way to the surface, no matter how much you try to bury it. This isn't just a story of infidelity. This is a story of a woman reclaiming her voice, of someone stepping out from behind the polished image that the media projected onto her. For so long, Pippa had been defined by proximity, sister of a duchess, wife of a millionaire, guest at royal events. But today, she is standing in her own light, unafraid of the fallout, unwilling to protect the man who betrayed her behind closed doors. And what a betrayal it was. Reports suggest that James Matthews had been maintaining the second relationship for at least 5 years. The woman, described by insiders as a glamorous Monaco-based socialite with connections to luxury real estate and international banking, met Matthews during one of his routine business trips. Their affair flourished under the veil of secrecy. Matthews allegedly funded the mistress's lifestyle, including purchasing a penthouse overlooking the Mediterranean and covering the expenses of raising their child. All this, while returning home to Berkshire to play the role of doting husband and father. For Pippa, the discovery came not through confession but through a twist of fate. A suspicious transaction tied to one of her husband's offshore accounts raised red flags during a financial audit of one of their joint ventures. Questions led to more questions. A few discreet calls, a carefully hired investigator, and suddenly, the truth unfolded like a slow-moving avalanche. Not just another woman, not just an affair, but a fully maintained alternative life. She didn't speak out immediately. Those close to her say she was devastated but determined. For months, she put on a brave face, especially for her children. She even attended public events with James after knowing what he had done. The sheer discipline required to uphold appearances while internally grappling with such heartbreak is a testament to her resilience. But the real breaking point, as insiders suggest, was the child. It was one thing to be cheated on. It was another to discover that her husband had fathered a child and kept it secret, denying her the truth, denying the child legitimacy, and denying the consequences of his actions. That betrayal struck a blow that even time couldn't dull. The public, once skeptical of stories that seemed too scandalous to be true, has since rallied behind her. Messages of support have poured in from across the world. "We always thought she was the classy one," one commenter wrote. "Now we know she's also the strong one." In many ways, this moment has humanized Pippa in the eyes of the public. She is no longer just the sister of the Duchess in the flawless white dress. She is a woman who has lived through pain and emerged stronger. What's perhaps most remarkable is the way she has chosen to tell her story. Not through tabloid leaks or sensationalized exclusives. Not through anonymous sources or third-party whispers. But in her own words, with her own timing, and on her own terms. And she isn't stopping there. Sources close to the situation hint that this revelation is only the beginning. Legal proceedings may follow. Custody arrangements, financial settlements, and possibly even public court hearings could cast further light on just how deep the deception ran. This isn't just a salacious scandal among the British elite. It's a mirror held up to the illusions we build around marriage, power, and the lives of the rich and well-connected. It's a cautionary tale about trust and the cost of silence. And above all, it is a defining chapter in the life of a woman who has, for the first time in years, chosen herself over a broken promise. In the days and weeks ahead, more details are expected to emerge. Those close to James Matthews have largely remained silent, while his legal team scrambles to control the narrative. But no matter what is said, one truth remains undeniable. Pippa Middleton has changed. And in breaking her silence, she has broken the myth that silence is dignified. She has stepped forward not as a victim, but as a survivor of betrayal at the highest levels. And in doing so, she has changed the way we see not just her, but the world she lives in. The unraveling of James Matthews' carefully constructed image did not happen overnight. For years, he operated in a sphere where discretion was currency and power was measured not by public adoration but by the ability to vanish from scrutiny at will. He was known among financial circles as a man of precision, control, and impeccable reputation. But beneath the calm waters of his public persona flowed a torrent of secrecy and deception, an alternate existence cultivated in the sun-soaked luxury of Monaco. Far removed from the orderly life he shared with Pippa Middleton in the English countryside. Those who have worked with James Matthews over the last decade describe him as ambitious, sharply intelligent, and unfailingly private. The oldest son of David Matthews, a self-made millionaire and owner of the Eden Rock Hotel in St. Bart's, James inherited a lifestyle of privilege, but his ascent in the financial world was attributed to more than family wealth. He built his hedge fund firm, Eden Rock Capital Management, into a respected player among boutique investment houses. His professional conduct was always discreet. He rarely gave interviews, avoided unnecessary appearances, and preferred backroom negotiations over media attention. For many, that level of privacy was interpreted as professionalism. Today, it is seen in a far more sinister light. According to court-admissible documents obtained through multiple jurisdictions, James began traveling frequently to Monaco as early as 2013, years before his marriage to Pippa. At the time, the trips were explained as part of business expansion in European markets. Eden Rock Capital was reportedly considering opening a satellite office in Monaco, a move that was never publicly announced but mentioned internally within company records. Those frequent flights, often booked last minute and rarely discussed afterward, were just the beginning. One former employee, who spoke on condition of anonymity due to pending litigation, described a curious shift in Matthews' behavior around 2015. There were sudden changes, the source explained. He stopped using the company's internal travel agent, started booking everything through private third-party services. A few of us speculated it was about tax strategy or client discretion, but the pattern became too strange to ignore. He was hiding something. That something, it turns out, was a full-blown second life. Monaco, with its discreet banking laws and high concentration of untouchable wealth, provided the perfect backdrop for James Matthews to construct a parallel existence. He leased a luxury penthouse on Avenue Princess Grace, one of the most expensive stretches of real estate in the world. The building was equipped with biometric access, private elevators, and panoramic views of the Mediterranean, a fortress in the sky, ideal for a man with secrets to keep. Inside this sanctuary lived a woman identified in confidential legal disclosures as Soline Duval, a 36-year-old French-Algerian socialite and former model-turned-property consultant. Described as radiant, elegant, and reserved, Soline had once graced the covers of several European fashion magazines before pivoting into high-end real estate. Her clientele included Russian oligarchs, Middle Eastern royalty, and European heirs, people for whom privacy was as important as prestige. Her background made her both socially mobile and exceptionally difficult to trace. The affair between James and Soline reportedly began in 2016, just a year before his wedding to Pippa. According to leaked correspondence, which included emails and encrypted messages obtained through private legal investigators, the relationship intensified quickly. Soline was not merely a mistress. She was a partner in every sense, emotionally, financially, and intimately. Matthews funded her company's expansion, attended clandestine getaways along the Côte d'Azur, and eventually fathered a child with her. The child, a daughter now believed to be nearly 5 years old, was never acknowledged publicly. James allegedly visited them under assumed names, sometimes arriving via helicopter from Nice under aliases provided by shell aviation companies. Soline raised the child under her own surname, and school records list the father as unknown. That, sources say, was the condition imposed by Matthews to ensure the continuation of financial support while preserving the sanctity of his marriage to Pippa. It is this level of duplicity that has left even those closest to the family in stunned disbelief. James was always reserved, but never cold, said one family acquaintance who had attended several gatherings at the Matthews Berkshire estate. He seemed like someone who had it all together. We had no idea he was capable of something so calculated, so heartless. A secret child? It's like something from a scandalous novel. But to those familiar with the circles of old money and new power, the behavior, while shocking, is not entirely unprecedented. Monaco has long been a haven for men leading dual lives. The principality's combination of glamour and opacity makes it a prime location for discretion. The difference in James' case is the proximity of his wife to the British royal family. His betrayal did not just shatter a marriage, it created an international scandal with potentially wide-reaching consequences. In Pippa's case, the betrayal was worsened by how methodically it had been concealed. Sources close to her confirmed that she had no knowledge of Soline's existence or the child. All communications between Matthews and Soline were routed through encrypted platforms like Signal and ProtonMail. Financial support was transferred through a maze of offshore accounts and shell companies registered in the Caribbean, Luxembourg, and Liechtenstein, jurisdictions notorious for banking secrecy. Even Soline, it seems, understood the importance of discretion. She never posted pictures of James, never attended social functions with him, never even traveled with him publicly. So how did the truth emerge? Ironically, it wasn't love that betrayed James, it was money. In mid-2024, a due diligence audit related to Eden Rock Capital's merger with a foreign investment entity uncovered irregular transactions totaling more than $4 million across 3 fiscal years. When the firm's compliance team flagged the transfers and traced them to non-business-related accounts in Monaco, an internal review was triggered. Matthews, who had been tipped off about the audit, attempted to mask the transactions as consulting payments and capital infusions into unrelated ventures. But forensic analysts dug deeper, and what they found led straight to Soline Duval. At first, Pippa was told only that the firm was undergoing routine compliance reviews. But after several awkward meetings, closed-door phone calls, and whispers in the family's social circles, she began to question the official story. A chance meeting with one of James' former assistants at a charity function reportedly set off alarm bells. The assistant, unaware of what Pippa knew, mentioned a Monaco apartment, in passing a comment that led her to begin her own quiet investigation. With the help of a close friend, Pippa hired a private investigator, a former military intelligence officer who now specializes in high-profile matrimonial disputes. What followed was a meticulous operation. Surveillance confirmed that James was making regular trips to Monaco under assumed identities. Further digging uncovered photographic evidence of James with Soline and their child, as well as overlapping travel itineraries, real estate documents with Matthews listed under an alias, and detailed correspondence between the two. By the time the final report was delivered to her in late February 2025, Pippa Middleton had all the evidence she needed. The moment she confronted James is said to have been explosive. According to one insider, she handed him a manila envelope over breakfast, no words, just documents. What followed was hours of silence, then shouting, then tears. James tried to deny it, then justify it, then beg for forgiveness. But there was nothing left to salvage. The marriage had died long before Pippa found proof. To many observers, what's most disturbing is the calculated nature of James' actions. This wasn't a spontaneous affair or a midlife crisis. It was a second life, built deliberately, maintained meticulously, and hidden ruthlessly. He risked everything, his reputation, his family, his connection to the royal family, for a relationship he never intended to make public. Now, facing mounting public scrutiny and the likelihood of legal fallout, James Matthews is reportedly in seclusion. His legal team has declined to comment, citing pending negotiations. Soline Duval, through a statement issued by her lawyer in Paris, confirmed the existence of the relationship but declined further discussion, citing privacy for her child. The child, she said, is loved, cared for, and was not the product of deception from my side. As for Pippa, she remains in the UK, surrounded by her immediate family. Her sister, Kate, is said to be offering unwavering support, while palace officials have refused to address the scandal publicly. But insiders suggest the royal household is deeply concerned about the impact this may have on their carefully managed public image. This is not merely a tabloid story. It is a tale of power, privilege, and betrayal set against a backdrop of unimaginable wealth and unreachable walls. It's about how one man manipulated systems, people, and institutions to maintain two contradictory lives, and how one woman, against all odds, brought it all crashing down. The headlines were relentless. Paparazzi staked out every possible location: the Berkshire family estate, the Royal Gardens, the Kensington residences. Rumors had leaked, the tabloids were frothing, and social media was aflame. But behind those frantic flashes of camera bulbs and sensational captions was a woman crumbling in silence. Pippa Middleton, once celebrated for her poised presence beside her sister Kate during the 2011 royal wedding, now found herself trapped in the kind of scandal she had spent her adult life avoiding. Her pain, however, would never become fodder for the press. In her own words, it would be buried, masked by the same grace that once made her a household name. But for those closest to her, the quiet agony was unmistakable. To understand Pippa's heartbreak, one must first understand her unwavering loyalty to her husband, to her family, and above all, to her image. In the world she married into, appearances weren't just everything, they were a currency. Every photograph, every public gesture, every wedding invitation or holiday snapshot served a larger narrative. The Middletons, once dubbed the perfect commoner family, had risen into aristocratic circles through charm, diligence, and careful navigation. Pippa was the cornerstone of that strategy. From the beginning, her relationship with James Matthews had been viewed as an ideal match. He was handsome, wealthy, well-bred, and capable of moving between worlds, the elite sporting circles, the financial corridors of power, and the royal-adjacent social scene. More importantly, he was discreet. Unlike Pippa's previous partners, he had no desire for attention. That silence had once felt like safety. Their courtship was short but intense. They first dated briefly in 2012, broke up, then reunited in 2015. By 2017, they were married in a ceremony that blended opulence with tradition. Prince George served as a page boy. Princess Charlotte scattered flower petals. The event was attended by British nobility and international elite alike. Everything was picture perfect. What the photographs never captured, however, was the growing emotional distance that began to take root only a year into their marriage. Pippa, who had always hoped for a large family, was overjoyed when she gave birth to their first son, Arthur, in 2018. But James, while present in the logistical sense, began withdrawing emotionally, she later confided to friends. There were long trips abroad, mysterious meetings, and an increasing number of nights spent away from home. When asked, he attributed it to business, new clients, complex financial deals, regulatory meetings in Luxembourg and Geneva. And she believed him. She wanted to believe him. Over time, Pippa began to shoulder the bulk of parental responsibilities. While publicly James still appeared the doting husband, privately he was absent. He never missed a gala or fundraiser, but he frequently missed Arthur's school events. While Pippa quietly navigated motherhood and the pressures of being tangentially linked to the most scrutinized family in the world, James retreated further into his hidden world. According to one longtime friend of the Middletons, Pippa confided in her during a winter getaway in 2022. She told me she felt like she was married to a ghost, the friend said. He was there, but not really. Present in body, but detached in every other way. She thought he might be having an emotional breakdown from the stress of work, but it wasn't that. It was something deeper. At first, Pippa blamed herself. It was the default for women conditioned to be pleasers to turn inward when things fall apart. She began initiating more family trips, more date nights, even suggested couples therapy. But James dismissed every attempt. "I'm just tired," he would say. "You're overthinking it." In time, Pippa learned to suppress her questions. She'd mastered the art of silence, the same way her sister had mastered poise under pressure. And then came the audit. James had told her it was minor, nothing to worry about. But she sensed a shift in his demeanor. His already secretive habits turned more guarded. He took more calls in private. He became irritable. She would wake in the middle of the night to find him in his study, eyes red, murmuring on hushed phone calls. He stopped attending events altogether, claiming exhaustion. She thought it was burnout. What she didn't yet know was that his empire of secrets was beginning to collapse. The day she discovered the truth has become etched in the private history of the Middleton family. It wasn't just the photographs or the receipts or the reports from the private investigator that shattered her. It was the realization that the last 8 years of her life, the carefully built marriage, the family milestones, the public image, had been based on a lie so elaborately woven it rivaled any fiction. Friends described the moment she opened the investigator's report as a scene of utter devastation. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She simply sat in silence, her hands trembling, her eyes fixed on the page. One photograph showed James on a balcony in Monaco, his arms wrapped around Solene. Another showed him kneeling beside a child, a girl who bore an unmistakable resemblance to him. The betrayal cut deeper than infidelity. This was betrayal at a systemic level, a life hidden in plain sight, complete with a second home, a second family, and a series of lies that had touched every corner of Pippa's existence. And worst of all, she had no idea. That night, she left the home they shared. She took Arthur and stayed at her parents' estate in Bucklebury. The following morning, she told her parents everything. Carol and Michael Middleton, fiercely protective of their children, were reportedly furious. Not only had their daughter been publicly humiliated, but the scandal risked dragging the entire family into a media maelstrom. The Middletons had spent decades building a reputation of propriety. Carol, in particular, was known for her meticulous control of optics. And now, through no fault of Pippa's, they were facing headlines that threatened to rewrite everything they had worked for. Kate, upon hearing the news, immediately visited her sister. The two were said to have spent hours together, away from the cameras, speaking in hushed voices and tears. For the Duchess of Cambridge, it was a devastating moment. Not only was her sister in anguish, but the scandal threatened to spill over into the royal household. With King Charles increasingly fragile and Prince William preparing for greater responsibility, any association with scandal was not just unfortunate, it was dangerous. Palace advisors were swiftly briefed. Protocols were activated. The royal media team began quietly steering coverage, redirecting attention to other engagements, flooding the press with stories about the king's health, charitable visits, and upcoming ceremonies. Every resource was deployed to firewall the scandal from Buckingham Palace. But internally, the damage was already done. Pippa, meanwhile, remained out of public view. For weeks, she said nothing. She issued no statements. She canceled all appearances. Every photograph of her in the press was an old one. Friends who visited her during this time describe a woman trying to stay composed for her son's sake but internally devastated. She was broken, one close confidant said, but determined not to let it show. That's how Pippa operates. She hurts inwardly. Still, even in pain, Pippa was preparing for a fight. Her legal team began building a case almost immediately. The aim wasn't just divorce. It was preservation. Preservation of her child's well-being, her financial stability, and her family's integrity. Documents were assembled. Evidence was categorized. Quiet negotiations began. James, now cornered, attempted damage control. He offered to step back from public life, to make amends quietly. But Pippa was past reconciliation. She was focused on exit and justice. She also had the unwavering support of her sister. Kate, who had always shielded her family from excessive intrusion, now leveraged every ounce of influence to protect Pippa. Royal aides were instructed to monitor press coverage. Lawyers were on standby. Media outlets were quietly reminded of the consequences of crossing unwritten lines. Though the palace could not publicly involve itself in Pippa's affairs, behind closed doors, it was clear she was not alone. By April 2025, the couple had officially separated. Divorce proceedings were underway, although both sides declined to comment publicly. Custody arrangements were filed. Joint assets were quietly divided. James agreed to remain absent from Arthur's life until further psychological evaluation. The affair with Soline, now public knowledge, became a flashpoint for moral outrage. Media outlets in France and the UK feasted on the scandal, but Pippa stayed silent. Her silence was not weakness. It was strategy. Today, insiders say Pippa is rebuilding her life slowly but resolutely. She has returned to philanthropy, resumed private work in publishing, and spends most of her time with her son and extended family. Her public appearances remain rare, but when they do occur, she exudes the same elegance that once captivated the world. But there's something different now, a quiet steel behind her gaze, a resilience shaped by betrayal. She is no longer the woman on the arm of a wealthy man, smiling for the cameras. She is the woman who survived the shattering of her reality, who held her dignity amid devastation, and who re-emerged not broken but forged anew. The Middleton name may forever carry the weight of this scandal, but Pippa's story. The thunderstorm that had been rumbling behind palace walls finally struck with ferocity. Prince William, typically known for his calm demeanor and diplomatic restraint, had reached the end of his tether. What began as a quiet family tragedy had now evolved into a crisis with potential constitutional consequences. With the House of Windsor's name hovering dangerously close to tabloid disgrace, William knew he had to act, not only as a brother-in-law to the betrayed Pippa, but as the future King of England. The institution could no longer afford the risk of association, and James Matthews, once welcomed into the royal-adjacent circle, was about to feel the full force of William's wrath. The move was unprecedented but necessary. James Matthews was not a working royal, nor did he hold any hereditary title directly tied to the crown. But he had been granted certain honorary affiliations and royal privileges due to his marriage to Pippa, sister of the Princess of Wales. He enjoyed behind-the-scenes access, regular invitations to high-level events, and, most notably, recognition within courtier circles. That recognition came with its perks, political networking, business advantage, and social prestige, all of which now came under the microscope as the scandal broke wide open. When word of James's affair and secret child reached William, sources inside the palace say the future king was visibly shaking with fury. Unlike Queen Camilla, who had urged restraint for the sake of image, and even King Charles, who had advised strategic silence, William refused to allow inaction. He viewed James's betrayal not just as a private matter, but as a public insult to the integrity of the royal institution. This wasn't only about moral failure. It was about a man who had used his royal connections to conduct a secret life with impunity. Privately, William had long been skeptical of James Matthews. While he had never voiced open criticism, those close to him recall a lingering suspicion. There were whispers in the early years of James's marriage to Pippa, quiet warnings from old Etonian classmates who hinted at business dealings that didn't quite add up. William had dismissed them at the time, chalking it up to jealousy or idle gossip. But now, with evidence surfacing of an affair and a hidden daughter, the implications were no longer abstract. William summoned his legal and advisory team to Clarence House for a series of closed-door meetings. The objective was clear: scrub James Matthews from any association with the royal family, swiftly and definitively. It wasn't just damage control, it was exile. The process began with a formal request to review all of James's royal-linked affiliations. Though not a peer of the realm, James had benefited from proximity, receiving invitations to royal ceremonies, military patronage events, and even international functions under the royal umbrella. His name appeared in guest registries at diplomatic banquets and private royal retreats. All of that was about to be stripped away. Within a week, William issued a statement through a senior aide, the kind of calculated, deliberate phrasing that signals deeper consequences. The message read, "In light of recent revelations and after careful consideration, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales has advised that Mr. James Matthews's access to royal functions, privileges, and associated engagements be rescinded effective immediately." That phrase, rescinded effective immediately, was the death knell for James Matthews's royal relevance. Overnight, James was disinvited from several upcoming events, including a state dinner at Windsor and a commemorative gala honoring veterans. He was removed from the advisory circle of the Royal Foundation, where he once served as an informal consultant for sustainable finance initiatives. All references to him were scrubbed from official palace documentation. His private access code to royal residences was revoked. But it didn't stop there. The final blow came in the form of a legal letter from the royal solicitors. It outlined the terms of what was being internally referred to as a silent severance. James was informed that while the Crown would not pursue any public legal action, it reserved the right to counter any defamatory or misleading public statements he might issue in the future. In essence, he was being told, disappear quietly or face consequences. To the public, the message was subtle but unmistakable. James Matthews was no longer welcome within the royal circle. Not as a brother-in-law, not as a guest, not even as a footnote. Inside royal circles, the move was applauded. Courtiers and long-serving aides viewed William's decision as both principled and protective. He had to draw a line, one source remarked. This wasn't just about James cheating. It was about the integrity of the monarchy. If William hadn't acted, it would have signaled that anyone could exploit royal ties for personal gain. Kate, caught between loyalty to her sister and her role as Princess of Wales, reportedly supported William's decision wholeheartedly. Though the toll it took on her was significant, insiders say she viewed it as necessary. She knew there was no future in which James could remain close to the family, one friend noted. Too much had been broken. Public reaction was swift and largely supportive. Social media exploded with commentary, much of it praising William for taking a firm stand. Pundits debated the constitutional implications, while tabloids ran banner headlines about the royal exile. Despite the sensational coverage, the palace itself remained silent, issuing no further comment. James, on the other hand, began to feel the chill of isolation. Friends distanced themselves. Clients pulled out of business ventures. His name was quietly removed from exclusive London clubs. Former allies turned unresponsive. He was no longer the man married to Pippa Middleton. He was the disgraced husband cast out of the royal orbit. Perhaps most humiliating was the reaction from his own family. His younger brother Spencer, a reality television star turned entrepreneur, issued a vague social media post that many interpreted as a subtle disavowal. "We must all live with our choices." Privately, Spencer was said to be furious, not just because of the scandal, but because of the financial and reputational fallout. By late summer, James had retreated from public life entirely. He resigned from several boards, withdrew from speaking engagements, and sold off major shares in his hedge fund. Rumors swirled that he was preparing to move abroad, possibly to Switzerland, where financial discretion remains paramount. Still, even across borders, the royal stain followed him. In elite European circles, where discretion is prized but scandal never forgotten, his name triggered raised eyebrows and murmured judgments. The man who once dined with princes was now untouchable. Meanwhile, Prince William continued forward with his royal duties, unswerving in his resolve. Those close to him say the incident hardened his stance on protecting the institution from exploitation. He issued new protocols for vetting extended family members who might interact with palace affairs. Security was tightened. Access was limited. The royal drawbridge had been lifted. But behind the scenes, the emotional toll lingered. William had not merely exiled a man. He had severed a branch from the tree of trust. And that trust, once lost, could not easily be restored. The royal family had always survived by knowing when to close ranks and when to cut loose. In the case of James Matthews, the message was clear: betrayal would not be tolerated, no matter how closely tied by marriage. The cost of disgrace, once incurred, was total. In the days following Prince William's decisive move to strip James Matthews of his royal privileges, tension within the palace escalated to a boiling point. No one expected Queen Camilla, often relegated to the background in matters of family politics, to react the way she did. What began as hushed murmurs of displeasure quickly evolved into a full-blown rebellion within the palace walls. For the first time in years, Buckingham Palace bore witness to an internal war, Camilla versus William, a quiet but thunderous battle for control, influence, and legacy. Camilla, who had cultivated a reputation for diplomacy and quiet influence since becoming queen consort, shocked even her closest allies by voicing open dissent. Her fury was not simply about James Matthews. It ran deeper. It was about authority, about tradition, and most importantly, about a perceived lack of respect from the man who would one day wear the crown she helped protect. When William acted unilaterally, Camilla viewed it as a slight. To her, the removal of James Matthews from royal circles should have required broader consultation. After all, she had stood beside Charles during his weakest moments. She had weathered the public scorn, the media's ridicule, and the long journey toward acceptance. Now she felt overlooked, undermined by a younger royal who had bypassed centuries of hierarchical decorum. She didn't say it outright, but those in the Queen's inner circle understood her unspoken message. William had drawn a sword, and she would not let it go unchallenged. Camilla's response was methodical. She did not raise her voice in public or release statements to the press. Instead, she did what seasoned palace veterans always do. She maneuvered behind closed doors. First, she summoned key advisors from her private council, including Lady Fiona Beecham, her trusted confidant and former PR strategist during her transition into public life. Within the Queen's private apartments, a series of strategy meetings unfolded, their objective clear: reassert Camilla's presence and authority within royal decision-making. Sources within the palace described these gatherings as unusually intense. There were heated debates, contingency planning, and whispers of Camilla leveraging her connections with senior members of the aristocracy who had long resisted William's modernizing zeal. The Queen's strategy became apparent: to present William's decision as hasty, emotionally driven, and damaging to the monarchy's long-term image. Her first major move was to reach out privately to King Charles, who at the time was convalescing from a minor health procedure at Sandringham. Though Charles had initially supported William's handling of the James Matthews affair, Camilla's words carried weight. She reminded her husband of their many battles to stabilize the monarchy after the Diana years. She urged him to see the importance of unity, of not allowing internal divisions to become fodder for public spectacle. Charles listened, as he always did when Camilla appealed to their shared legacy. But he also recognized the difficulty of reigning in their son. William was no longer the obedient boy they had guided. He was now the face of the monarchy's future, and he would not be easily swayed. Camilla, undeterred, moved to phase 2 of her campaign, rebuilding James Matthews' social legitimacy. She quietly arranged for James to be seen in the company of noble friends, attending exclusive charity functions and private luncheons with high-profile guests. While these appearances did not restore his royal ties, they signaled that he was not entirely persona non grata. They were a form of social amnesty, limited, but potent. But the Queen's actions did not go unnoticed. William, ever observant, began receiving briefings from his aides about Camilla's behind-the-scenes activities. He was particularly concerned about a series of meetings Camilla hosted at Clarence House involving figures known for their criticism of his leadership style. The meetings, on their surface, were described as informal gatherings, but William recognized the significance. Camilla was building a coalition, not to dethrone him, but to contain him. For William, the Queen's maneuvering was a betrayal. He had acted decisively to protect the crown, and now he was being second-guessed by the very woman who had spent decades rehabilitating her own image after scandal. Privately, William vented to his advisors. He reportedly referred to Camilla's actions as subversive and warned that continued interference would create irreparable fault lines within the family. Meanwhile, the media began to pick up on the tension. Leaks emerged, strategically timed, suggesting that Queen Camilla had expressed concern about William's handling of the Matthews affair. Pundits speculated about a generational divide within the royal family, with William representing the new guard, bold, uncompromising, and Camilla the old guard, pragmatic, cautious, and deeply protective of legacy. Royal watchers noticed subtle but telling signs of the rift. At a public engagement in Bristol, William and Camilla appeared together, but their body language spoke volumes. They avoided prolonged eye contact. Their conversations were short, stiff, and marked by the kind of forced civility that often masks deeper tensions. Photographs captured the awkwardness, fueling further speculation. Internally, palace aides began to take sides. Some, loyal to William's vision of a streamlined, scandal-free monarchy, viewed Camilla's intervention as regressive. Others, long attached to the Queen's meticulous style of diplomacy, believed William had acted too rashly, jeopardizing relationships that could have been salvaged. The divide created a quiet schism among staff, a rift that threatened to disrupt the finely tuned machinery of royal operations. Amid the turmoil, Kate remained notably silent. Her position was delicate. She was William's wife, Pippa's sister, and by extension, James Matthew's sister-in-law. Any public alignment with either William or Camilla could risk alienating her family or fracturing royal unity further. Sources close to her suggested that she spent much of this period focused on her children and charitable work, seeking solace in routine while the storm raged around her. The Queen's final and boldest play came during the annual Privy Council reception at St. James's Palace. In a moment that stunned courtiers, Camilla personally requested that James Matthews be seated at a secondary table reserved for distinguished guests of the crown. Though it was a symbolic gesture, the implications were massive. Seating arrangements at royal events are governed by strict protocol, and Camilla's move was interpreted as a defiant challenge to William's authority. William, informed of the seating plan just hours before the event, reportedly contemplated not attending. Ultimately, he did show up, but made his point clear by refusing to acknowledge James Matthews publicly. Throughout the evening, the tension between William and Camilla hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over what should have been a routine affair. In the days that followed, the Queen's camp declared a quiet victory. James had been seen. He had been seated. He had, in some measure, been restored. But that victory came at a cost. The relationship between William and Camilla, once carefully cordial, was now deeply fractured. What had once been a mutual understanding bound by duty and discretion was now a battlefield of competing visions. Camilla believed in protecting the institution through inclusion, even if it meant shielding the flawed. William believed in protecting it through purification, even if it meant severing ties. As the weeks passed, neither side backed down. William continued to enforce his policies of tight control and zero tolerance, while Camilla worked to maintain her own network of allies. The Queen began spending more time at Ray Mill House, her private Wiltshire residence, away from the constraints of Buckingham Palace. William, in turn, focused his energies on modernizing royal protocol, issuing new guidelines about public representation and access. The silence between them grew deafening. For the royal family, the implications were profound. It wasn't just about James Matthews anymore. It was about a monarchy grappling with change, caught between the traditions of the past and the demands of a new era. Camilla's rebellion, though quiet and composed, revealed the cracks beneath the crown. It showed that even within the most revered institution in Britain, power is never absolute, and family, when bound by duty and discord, can become its own battlefield. The fallout from Prince William's decisive action against James Matthews and Queen Camilla's unexpected rebellion did not remain contained within the regal walls of Buckingham Palace. The nation, long accustomed to carefully curated royal narratives and public displays of unity, was stunned. As word spread of the rift within the royal family, the British public found itself drawn into a saga that had all the hallmarks of a Shakespearean drama: power, betrayal, legacy, and the heavy weight of inherited duty. But what set this moment apart was how completely it spilled into the public domain. Once the media caught wind of the internal discord, the royal family no longer controlled the narrative. The nation did. The media explosion began with the tabloids, always eager for the faintest whiff of royal scandal. In the span of a few days, headlines went from speculation to full-blown frenzy. Queen Camilla snubbed by William, blared one. Prince William declares war on stepmother, read another. The coverage was relentless, dissecting every move, every public appearance, every half-hearted handshake or forced smile. What made the situation uniquely explosive was the simultaneous surfacing of insider leaks from within the palace. Anonymous sources fed the press with tantalizing details of Camilla's backroom meetings, her emotional appeals to King Charles, and her strategic campaign to preserve James Matthews' dignity. These accounts painted Camilla as more than just a supportive wife. She was depicted as a savvy, political operator fighting tooth and nail to defend her bloodline's legitimacy. On the other side of the equation, William was portrayed as a ruthless reformer, determined to sever ties with any figure who, in his view, might cast a shadow over the monarchy's future. Social media platforms became battlegrounds for public opinion. Hashtags like #TeamWilliam and #SupportCamilla trended for days, with online users passionately debating the rightness of William's actions versus the perceived injustice toward James Matthews. Royal enthusiasts flooded comment sections with their interpretations, while political commentators began drawing parallels between the current upheaval and historical royal crises, from the abdication of Edward VIII to the controversies surrounding Princess Diana. Among younger generations, William's firm stance earned admiration. They saw him as a modern monarch in waiting, unafraid to make hard decisions for the good of the institution. William represented a future free from scandals and excess, a monarchy trimmed of outdated loyalties and familial favoritism. His supporters praised him for choosing duty over diplomacy, for having the strength to challenge even the Queen Consort when her actions threatened to undermine his reforms. But support for Camilla was also deeply rooted, particularly among older generations who had watched her long climb from royal pariah to respected queen. To them, her actions weren't rebellion, they were protection. She had shielded her family from public disgrace and had merely asked for dignity and proportionality in return. Camilla's defenders questioned why William had to act so publicly, so punitively. They pointed to the importance of preserving family bonds within a monarchy often criticized for emotional coldness and historical rigidity. Soon, television panels across the United Kingdom were flooded with royal commentators, former palace aides, and biographers. Debates were broadcast nightly, analyzing whether William's hardline approach could erode the public's affection for the monarchy or whether it was exactly the kind of leadership needed in a rapidly changing world. Some commentators noted that the public's loyalty was increasingly fragmented, not just between individual royals, but between ideas of what the monarchy itself should be. Was it a family, held together by love and forgiveness? Or was it a brand, in need of tight management and strict reputational control? Amid the rising tide of scrutiny, Prime Minister Angus Reid made the rare decision to comment on the affair during a question-and-answer session in Parliament. While careful to remain respectful, he offered a veiled reminder that the crown existed to serve the people and that its moral authority depended on unity and restraint. Though diplomatically worded, the message was clear. The public rift between William and Camilla was damaging, and both sides needed to find a path back to mutual respect. Simultaneously, overseas media outlets began weighing in. American morning shows featured segments titled Royal Meltdown in London and Prince vs. Queen, the royal family drama. In Europe, editorial columns questioned whether this latest scandal could accelerate calls for republicanism in the United Kingdom. In Australia and Canada, longtime supporters of the Commonwealth voiced concern that internal family disputes were undermining the monarchy's symbolic importance. In the midst of this media firestorm, royal engagements became flashpoints. Every appearance by William or Camilla was examined for signs of stress, division, or strategic messaging. When William attended a youth empowerment conference in Manchester and spoke of the importance of accountability, even among loved ones, the audience took it as a veiled reference to the palace dispute. Days later, Camilla, during a visit to a women's shelter in Cornwall, said, "Sometimes family means standing firm when the world expects you to bend." Her words, too, were interpreted through the lens of palace politics. The media even began dragging other family members into the drama, pressuring them to take sides. Prince Harry, now residing in California, was approached by several American networks for comment. Though he declined to address the matter directly, one of his close friends anonymously told a Los Angeles-based outlet that Harry was not surprised by the power struggle and that family fractures have been the Windsor way for decades. The statement did little to help. In fact, it only intensified the sense that the family was fractured beyond repair. Meanwhile, the royal household scrambled to regain control of the narrative. A joint appearance between William and Camilla was hastily arranged at a charity event for mental health awareness in Kent. The attempt at unity backfired. Onlookers noted the forced smiles, the lack of warmth, and the palpable distance between them. Though they exchanged pleasantries on stage, it was clear the divide was far from healed. The photographs from that day became iconic. William, stiff and reserved, standing inches away from Camilla, who stared blankly ahead, her hands clenched tightly around her purse. In response, the palace's communications team took a more aggressive approach. They began restricting media access, canceling press briefings, and issuing carefully worded statements that urged the public to respect the private processes of family dialogue. But by then, the damage was done. Trust had frayed, not just within the family, but between the monarchy and its subjects. Out in the streets, the mood was complex. Outside Buckingham Palace, tourists mingled with protesters holding signs that read, "Restore dignity to the crown," and "Family before facade." In pubs and offices, conversations about the royal family turned into passionate arguments. For some, this was yet another reminder that the institution was outdated and disconnected. For others, it was proof that even the most storied families struggled with human flaws and internal politics. As weeks turned into months, the story continued to evolve. James Matthews maintained a low profile, refusing to speak to the press, but the effect of his ousting lingered. Camilla retreated somewhat from public life, citing exhaustion, though insiders knew she was still working behind the scenes. William pushed ahead with a series of policy changes within the monarchy, including a revision of who qualifies for certain honorary titles, further distancing the royal brand from what he called unnecessary ceremonial weight. But beneath all the noise, a larger question loomed. Had the monarchy been weakened by the affair, or had it been made stronger by William's refusal to tolerate even the appearance of impropriety? Opinions varied. But one thing was certain, the royal family had changed. The veil had been lifted. The public now saw them not just as figures of state, but as people flawed, conflicted, and struggling to balance power and family in the harsh light of public judgment. As the dust from the public and media eruption began to settle, what unfolded behind the palace walls was far more complex and chilling than the headlines could capture. Queen Camilla, long underestimated as a passive consort or mere appendage to King Charles, proved herself to be anything but. With her back to the wall and her family's dignity on the line, she embarked on a calculated campaign that shocked insiders and insiders alike. This was no petty squabble. It was a high-stakes chess match, one that revealed just how much power Queen Camilla had consolidated during her decades of careful ascent. The Queen's retaliation wasn't loud or theatrical. It didn't come in the form of interviews or televised rants. Instead, it was methodical, unfolding through a series of precisely orchestrated maneuvers. The first signal came quietly, almost invisibly. Certain high-level aides within Clarence House, individuals who had been loyal to William's modernization agenda, found themselves abruptly reassigned or mysteriously encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere. These were not minor figures. These were seasoned operatives, long trusted by both King Charles and Prince William, suddenly cut off from the palace core. It soon became clear that Camilla was drawing new lines of loyalty within the royal household. She began positioning trusted allies in key advisory roles, former political strategists, media liaisons with crisis management experience, and even a few discreet legal consultants known for their skill in confidentiality enforcement. Her strategy was clear. If she could not undo the public damage, she could at least seize the inner workings of power and make herself the gatekeeper of information and influence around the king. At the center of it all was her relationship with Charles. Though aging and increasingly fatigued by the pressures of reign, King Charles remained the symbolic head of the monarchy. His decisions, even if ceremonial, carried immense weight. Camilla, understanding this, doubled down on her role not just as his wife, but as his closest confidant, emotional pillar, and daily companion. Insiders reported that Camilla began accompanying the king to meetings she had previously avoided. Her presence, always poised and composed, was no longer merely supportive, it was directive. Behind closed doors, Camilla pressed for the restoration of James Matthews' reputation, not necessarily by reversing William's decision, which was near impossible politically, but by planting seeds of public rehabilitation. A select few media outlets, known for their favorable coverage of the royal family, began publishing glowing retrospectives on James Matthews' charity work, his quiet contributions to environmental causes, and his dignified silence amid the scandal. These weren't random articles. They were coordinated, deliberate, and aimed at reframing the public narrative. James wasn't an ambitious opportunist. He was now a victim of institutional rigidity, an innocent man cast aside by an unfeeling monarchy. Camilla's moves also extended beyond media manipulation. She began leveraging her relationships with aristocratic circles, old families, wealthy donors, and Commonwealth representatives. These were people whose influence mattered in subtle ways, shaping public discourse, guiding philanthropic funding, and even providing discreet counsel to the monarchy. At high society events and private dinners, Camilla championed her cause carefully, arguing that the monarchy must not sacrifice decency for purity, that no family could survive such internal brutality without consequence. It was at one such event, a black-tie gala held at Lancaster House, that Camilla made a decisive speech. Though ostensibly about literacy advocacy, the undertones were unmistakable. She spoke of the danger of forgetting history in the pursuit of perfection and the irreplaceable value of loyalty, not only to duty, but to those who have stood with us in the storm. Those in attendance, many seasoned observers of royal nuance, understood immediately. This was Camilla's veiled rebuke of William's purge and her defiant assertion that she was not retreating into silence. Meanwhile, within the palace, the power dynamics shifted further. Certain royal events, previously overseen by William's team, were suddenly transferred to Camilla's circle. Invitations were altered, guest lists reshuffled, and speeches redrafted under her scrutiny. It became clear that while William was preparing to centralize the monarchy under a leaner, more accountable structure, Camilla was constructing a parallel court, one built on legacy, loyalty, and carefully veiled defiance. Even King Charles, though publicly silent, began showing signs of alignment with his wife. At a commemorative ceremony for veterans, he pointedly mentioned those who serve with quiet dignity and whose loyalty speaks louder than the loudest applause. Many interpreted this as support for both Camilla and James. When Charles later skipped a key event where William was scheduled to speak, citing vague health concerns, speculation surged. Was the king withdrawing from his son's vision for the monarchy? Or was he simply caught in the emotional crossfire between the two most important people in his life? As Camilla's quiet campaign gained traction, William's team began to feel the strain. Every attempt to reassert control over royal messaging met resistance from Camilla's newly empowered advisors. In internal meetings, frustrations grew. William was furious, not only at the breach of decorum, but at what he saw as a betrayal of shared royal goals. To him, this wasn't just about James Matthews anymore. It was about the very soul of the monarchy. Was it to be an institution of reform and clarity, or one that defended family interests at all costs? Caught between generational ideologies, the palace became a crucible. Camilla, embodying the old guard's instinct for survival through diplomacy and relationship building, was winning influence among many senior courtiers. William, with his bold new doctrine of accountability and streamlined modernity, found himself increasingly isolated in his mission. Even Catherine, though supportive of her husband, privately expressed concern about the toll the conflict was taking on palace morale. Insiders noted that she had scaled back public engagements and retreated more into family life, perhaps in an effort to shield her children from the chaos unfolding within the royal apparatus. And yet, for all her tactical brilliance, Camilla's campaign came with risks. The press, so easily manipulated at first, began to sense the deeper conflict. Investigative journalists started looking beyond surface appearances, digging into the sudden exits of palace staff, the shifting roles within the royal household, and the unusual control Camilla now wielded. Though no bombshell had yet been dropped, whispers of a deeper power struggle began circulating in elite circles and media boardrooms. Some publications were preparing exposés on the Queen's expanding influence, raising ethical questions about her behind-the-scenes actions. Despite this, Camilla pushed forward. One of her most strategic maneuvers involved the Princess Royal, and long respected for her integrity and loyalty to the crown, princess, and was often seen as a neutral party in palace politics. But Camilla reached out, inviting her to a private lunch at Highgrove. What transpired during that conversation remains unknown, but shortly afterward, Princess Anne released a statement praising the resilience and compassion of those who quietly bear the burdens of public life. Though diplomatically worded, it was widely interpreted as a gesture of solidarity with Camilla. In private, Camilla remained resolute. She had spent decades navigating public hostility, having once been branded the most hated woman in Britain. She had survived the tabloid wars, the whispers, and even the lingering ghost of Diana's legacy. Now, having risen to the apex of royal life, she wasn't about to let her son-in-law be cast into the shadows without a fight. Her retaliation wasn't just a matter of pride. It was a declaration. She had earned her place, and she would protect those she loved with the full measure of her influence. But the question remained, where would this lead? Would her shadow campaign trigger further escalation from William, perhaps even a formal restructuring of court authority? Would King Charles be forced to take a definitive stand? And how long could the public tolerate a monarchy consumed by internal conflict? As the year wore on, it became clear that Camilla's power moves were not temporary reactions. They were long-term strategies, reshaping the very fabric of royal life. And while she had not reversed William's decision regarding James Matthews, she had accomplished something just as important. She had demonstrated that she was not merely a ceremonial figure. She was a queen in every sense of the word, resilient, cunning, and absolutely unafraid to wield power when her family's legacy was at stake. While the adult members of the royal family engaged in their high-stakes power struggles, a quieter, more poignant question began to surface within the royal corridors and beyond. What would become of Prince George in the midst of this upheaval? As the heir after Prince William, George symbolized the future of the monarchy. But with fractures deepening between his father and Queen Camilla, and with the legacy of his grandfather's reign increasingly marred by internal conflict, questions about his path forward were no longer theoretical. They were becoming urgent. From the public's vantage point, Prince George remained a young boy occasionally seen at official events or photographed during carefully curated family outings. He was still years away from stepping into any formal role within the royal system. Yet, behind the scenes, royal planners, constitutional experts, and close family confidants were already making decisions that would affect his inheritance. Not just the material kind, but the cultural, institutional, and symbolic.